All right, folks, it's 7:45, and I'd like to start my class, especially for people who might be watching, which it doesn't say there's anybody watching yet, but...
Putting a small ad in the Jewish Week about the yard side flags, because there's people used to, and they have it here, and it'd be the way to get them into the building.
Maybe. I doubt that, but yeah. Okay, so good evening, everybody. And I thought that I had this plan at the beginning of the year that there's a book that came out most recently to help understand what conservative Judaism is all about, kind of like an updated version of something that came out 20 years ago by Neil Gilman and something that came out 60 years ago by Rabbi Mordechai Waxman. All those previous iterations or summaries of what it means to be a conservative Jew and what the ideology of the conservative movement is. So I thought that that would be interesting, but then things have happened in the world that I thought were more impactful and immediate than that. So the fact that elections were called in Israel is an opportunity for us to discuss what that means. What is the Israeli electoral system all about? And why do we, as American Jews, why should we care about the elections in Israel? So for those of us who don't know, the Israeli democracy and the Israeli political system is, I wouldn't say it's unique, but it is quite different, and there aren't that many countries that are democracies that run their democracies that way. So in other words, we're used to, in America, voting for individuals who represent a particular political viewpoint and we vote for the person that we agree with. And we vote on a local level. So here in Montgomery County, we vote for county council members and at-large council members. We vote for, on the statewide system, we vote for delegates. Our state is divided into districts, and gerrymandering aside, there are districts. And so we have we're in District 14, we have 3 delegates. And then there's also a state senator. And then, of course, we got congressmen, which is even more gerrymandered than the state districts that we have, and U.S. senators, and, of course, president and vice president. So that's our system. And there's Congress, there's the president, and then there's the judiciary. So 3-branch government system that was created by George Washington and the other founding fathers over 200 years ago. Whereas in England, you do vote for individuals, and there are districts that that in which you live, and you're voting for your representative to the House of Commons. And then there's the House of Lords as well, and I have no idea how that works. But I think it's an old-fashioned system. I'm not sure that lords exist anymore, or that they have land holdings anymore. I really don't know. You have a title, but the former chief rabbi of England is a lord. So I don't think he was given any land or a house Right. So, but that's the way it used to be. But so it's not that anymore. It's a title. And okay, but they have some authority in the parliamentary system in England. I'm not sure what the authority is, but they have some kind of authority. I'm not sure they can legislate, but there are certain things that they have to be included in for certain acts, whatever. And then, of course, there's the constitutional monarchy. So she is the one to determine that, yes, this parliament and this prime minister is the prime minister, right? So in Israel, it is very different. So we have the Knesset, which Knesset means assembly. Like one name for a synagogue is a Beit Knesset, house of assembly. So it's the same word, Knesset, assembly. So lehikanes means to enter. A kinus, like USY has the teen youth group of the conservative movement, has conventions that are sometimes called kinusim, plural of kinus, people gathering together. Okay, so Knesset, kinus, same root, kaf nun samach, to assemble. So the Knesset, so Israel is a democracy, but the way they do it is different. It's based on a party list that you're voting for. So anybody can form a party, and as long as they register that party with the Israeli party registering system, and you don't necessarily need a platform. You can just you can be a one-issue party, like there is one called the Ale Yarok, the Green Leaf Party. And you can imagine what that leaf is. It's not a maple leaf, it's a cannabis leaf. And there is such a party in Israel. And so there are tons of parties. The most popular ones are the ones that have the ministers right now sitting in the government of Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu's party, the Likud, which recently formed a coalition. Well, before it ran in the election, it formed a coalition with another party to give it a better chance of winning more seats. So the way it works is there are 120 seats in the Knesset. So therefore, you need 61 seats to have a majority. No party in the history of Israel has ever won 61 seats in an election. They've come close, but no one party has won 61 seats to have a plurality. Oh, so you're voting for the party. You're not voting for a person. There's a person at the head of the list who's going to be number one on the list of 120 names that are on that list. So when you go to vote in Israel, so April 9th, I think, is when the elections is called for. April, that's the week before Passover. And so when you go to the election, you go to your polling booth and you have a different slips of paper in the booth. Each slip of paper has the logo or the Hebrew letter or Hebrew letters representing that political party that you're voting for. You rip off the piece of paper that has that letter on it that you want to vote for, and you put it in an envelope that you're given. You walk out of the booth with the envelope with that one piece of paper in it. I read up on this today to know how it's done. And as long as there's only one piece of paper in it that has that logo on it, if by chance there's a lot of people voting and they ran out of the official piece of paper that has the letter for the party that you want to vote for, they have blank pieces of paper in there that you can write the letter. As long as you write the letter legibly and people can see that it's the letter Ayin or it's the letter Aleph or whatever it is, you put that piece of paper in the envelope, it counts, and your vote is tallied for that. You can't write in some other name. You can't, like it said in the article that I read, you can't vote for a South American dictator or Mickey Mouse and put that in the envelope. It would be discarded. That would not be recorded as a vote for Mickey Mouse in the Israeli elections. So that's how it works. You vote for a party that represents a particular ideology. So in other words, if we were voting for that system to apply to America, how the Congress would work would be that we would be voting, let's say, okay, I'm Democrat. I'd be voting for the Democratic Party, which would be headed by, okay, it's 2008, by Barack Obama and Joe Biden. So those would be numbers 1 and 2 on the list. Out of how many seats are there in Congress? 435. Okay, plus right. So see how that it doesn't work. So in Israel, you're not in a district, and the people who you vote for are not in your district. This is the national election sitting in Knesset. You're voting for a party that you hope will have will get a majority of the votes so that they can be in a better position to form a coalition with other parties and form a government. That's how it works, because there's never been one political party that has won 61 seats in the so the amount of votes tallied versus the amount of eligible voters, you figure out what's the minimum percentage that a party needs to get of the total vote in order to have a seat in the Knesset. In the last election, they needed 3.25% of the total votes. Any party that got 3.25% of the vote got 1 seat in the Knesset. They determined that by based on, right, I think it's based on eligible voters as opposed to who actually voted. I think it's eligible voters in Israel. You divide that into, yeah, so again, it's beyond me. Math is not my strong point, but you figure out the percentage that you would need. So I guess the amount of eligible voters divided by 120 gets the percentage that you need. Yes, right? I think that's one way to do it. So that's how they figure it out. But you need to get 1 seat in the Knesset. I don't know how it, yes, so that, right, and who oversees it and making sure that it is safe. Right, so, yeah, so you guys can figure out the math and how it's done. Something like that. Yes. Okay. Yes. Whatever the percentages are, that's how a little bit more, because it's 3.25%, right? So you get 8 seats or something. So yes, that's how it works. So the parties that get the most seats are the ones. So the party that gets the most seats usually is the one that is then asked by the president of Israel to form a government, and they have 2 weeks to form a government. However, so it's not necessarily the party that has the most seats that will get the opportunity to form a coalition, because everybody knows who are the likely coalition partners for each party. So in other words, Likud is on the right, Labor is on the left. If Labor gets the most seats in the election, but there's nobody who wants to form a coalition with Labor, and everybody knows that because parties have come out and said there's no way we're going to sit with Labor in a government, then it's possible that the one that gets the second most seats would be the one officially asked by the president to form the next government. President is voted on by the Knesset. It's mainly a ceremonial position, except for this one, in which the president officially is the one to ask a party to form the coalition government.
So is he the president that's just been elected, or the previous president?
So the president is not elected when the elections happen. On April 9th, on April 10th, the day after the election, President Rivlin will still be the president of Israel. His term, 5 years, I believe, is determined by when he was elected by the Knesset. And then it's determined whether he's going to have another term or not. And then it's usually the government, the coalition government, whatever party is in charge. So in other words, it's a right-wing government right now. They're the ones who suggest the candidate, and they would probably be the one then to have the candidate elected, because Knesset votes, and you vote for your party and along party lines. So Rivlin he had been the speaker of the Knesset before, and is part of the Likud party, so he was.
Nobody gets 61.
No party gets 61.
No coalition.
Oh, it's impossible. There is going to be yes, you'd have more than 61. You want more than 61, so you'd have some kind of cushion in case there's an issue that comes up that one party in your coalition isn't so happy about something coming up. They could threaten not to vote on your coalition agreement, and they have a cushion to cover that. That's what you'd want in forming a coalition government. So you'd have much more than 61 seats so that you can cover your tush when something comes up. So, for example, ultra-Orthodox people in Israel, there's Haredi people who study in the yeshiva now are exempt from army service. Big outcry in Israel about that. Why should everybody else go and fight Israel's fights while they are sitting studying in the yeshiva? Who are they that they get this exemption? Well, there was an agreement that David Ben-Gurion struck when the state of Israel was established that allowed an exemption for yeshiva students. But when the state of Israel was established, there weren't that many yeshiva students in Israel at the time. So it wasn't a big deal. Nobody cared about that. 100 yeshiva students? Okay. Maybe 1,000. And now there are tens of thousands of yeshiva students in Israel who are not fighting, who are not drafted into the army. It's a major element of Israeli society, serving in the army. When you graduate high school, you go into the army. That's just what you do. And no matter what walk of life you come from in Israel, you know you're going into the army with people from other walks of life. It's a great melting pot of Israel. So in the Zionist history of Israel, you know, when people made Aliyah, were brought from Iraq, Iran, all over North Africa, this was the way that they learned how to speak Hebrew. This is the way they learned about Israeli society. There are education officers who serve in the Israeli army who would teach Hebrew to soldiers and teach other things that soldiers needed to learn in order to serve in the Army, Navy, Air Force, whatever it is. So it's a great melting pot. It's a defining element of Israeli society. And really, theoretically, you can go to college in Israel without serving in the army, but you really can't get a good job in Israel without proving that you've served in the army, except for the ultra-Orthodox, but they don't care because they're going to be in the yeshiva all their lives. So it's a major division in Israeli society about that. So I brought this up only because there has been a bill that has been promoted in the Knesset, and I think an element of the bill was that a certain amount of ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students need to serve in the army every year, and they restricted how many exemptions ultra-Orthodox would get. And they agreed, the Israeli military agreed to have a separate unit or separate units just for the ultra-Orthodox. So God forbid the ultra-Orthodox should mingle with people like us who are not ultra-Orthodox. That was a major, and they shouldn't have men and women together in the same unit as well. And that the food in the Israeli army is kosher. You go into a mess tent, it's kosher. But it's not kosher enough for the ultra-Orthodox to have a separate kosher supervision that is on a different level than the regular Israeli government. So all of that has been met, but there's still people arguing about it and threatening to leave the government over enforcement of the new Haredi draft bill in Israel. Okay, so these are elements that threaten Israeli. Now, the other element, major element that is threatening the Israeli government right now is Netanyahu's pending indictment. Okay, so the police, the Israeli police have recommended that Prime Minister Netanyahu be indicted on bribery charges, that he bribed some paper to write favorable articles about him or unfavorable articles about, right, whatever it was. Okay, so fake news, he's bribing the paper to either write fake news or to whatever it is about the news. So, and that his wife is involved in this as well. And I think his son was involved in it also. So it doesn't matter. Well, it mattered years ago when Prime Minister Rabin's wife was found out to have a secret foreign bank account. So back then, that brought Rabin, he had to resign as Prime Minister of Israel because his wife had an American bank account. That was illegal and because of her, he had to resign. Today, it's clear Sarah Netanyahu has done something wrong. It's not bringing him down. It's clear that he's done something wrong. He's been indicted by the police. But the Attorney General has to formally indict him. Yes, he's reviewing the charges as we speak. But it's a major debate in Israel now whether he's going to indict him before April 9th or after the elections. So why does it take that long to read the 700 pages of the charges? He has nothing else to do. I mean, you would think it's the number one thing he should be on this thing. How long does it take to read 700 pages? If it's the Prime Minister of Israel you're talking about, 2 days. Okay, give him a week. Give him a week to read it and then decide. But of course, it's all politics. And so now he's deciding whether he's going to do it. He said today, I think, for the people of Israel need, or it's we need to provide the people of Israel with justice. So, but he's going to decide when justice. The Attorney General.
Who elected him or appointed him?
So who appoints the Attorney General? I believe the Prime Minister of Israel appoints the Attorney General. So just like, the president can determine who's going to be in the cabinet, they have to be approved. So too, the Prime Minister appoints that. Could Netanyahu fire the Attorney General if the Attorney General indicts him? It's possible he could do that, but I don't think that would be a wise political move. Okay? Right? So, well, so he could do it. Technically, he could do it, but whether he should do that, that's another thing. Well, so it's like comparing apples and oranges, comparing Netanyahu and the Israeli political system to Trump and the American political system. And so you can go that place yourselves. Let me just talk about Israel and Netanyahu. So because the government of Israel has always been so fractious and divided, it's a wonder that anything has gotten done over these past 70 years that Israel's been in existence. There's no constitution for Israel, but that's not unusual. Apparently, I just found out that England does not have a constitution either. So you would think that the Magna Carta, but I guess that's not the constitution. So it's just silly me thinking that England had a constitution. It does not. So there are 11 basic laws that are. One of the basic law is any Jew in the world has a right to be a citizen of Israel automatically. Enter Israel, whatever port of entry, there's an office there that you can go to right after you get in and pass passport control. You could say, I want to become a citizen of Israel. They say, go right there, fill out some paperwork. Well, it's not so easy. You got to prove you're Jewish. And then, depending on that, usually you're automatically in. Okay, people who are not Jewish who want to be citizens of Israel, then it's like any other country, whether that's easy or not to become a citizen of Israel. As you know, there are foreign workers working in Israel, people from Thailand, the Philippines. There's the Israeli edition of America's Got Talent or The Voice or one of these things, had a Filipino worker who auditioned for the show, and she was great, and she won. She couldn't keep her winnings because she wasn't in the country legally. So it was a major thing that happened like last year or 2 years ago in Israel with a Filipino worker. So there are a lot of Filipino caregivers who work as caregivers for the elderly in Israel. So a ton of them. They learn how to speak Hebrew, and they're in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. You see these Filipino ladies gathered with their clients who are just walking through the shuk or walking down the street, and they're speaking Hebrew. It's the funniest thing. And now Philippines Airline also has requested nonstop flights from Manila to Tel Aviv, and they've asked Saudi Arabia for permission to fly over, because Air India has permission to fly over for direct flights from Tel Aviv to New Delhi. So El Al is up in arms about this because El Al doesn't have that permission from Saudi Arabia to fly over, so they're losing out on the competition to the flights to India. So that's something in the Times of Israel today too about Philippines Airline. Anyway, so the way I teach is with digressions, and so yes, I'm sorry about that. So 11 basic laws. That's what this started with. 11 basic laws plus other laws on the books from the time of pre-1917, when the Ottoman Turks were in charge of the land of Israel. So there are Ottoman laws on the books. There are British laws on the books from 1917 to 1948, when the British were in charge, plus Israeli laws that have been passed by the Knesset and upheld by the Israeli Supreme Court that are laws as well. So what? The Supreme Court are also, how are they nominated? I believe the Prime Minister puts those names forward as well. But I'm not sure about that, because there are Arabs who are on the Supreme Court. I think there's a Druze on the Supreme Court. So I'm not sure. I'm really not sure who puts those names up, but I would imagine it's the Prime Minister. But there are nine Supreme Court justices in Israel, I believe. There might be more, I don't remember, but they don't all sit together. They're divided into different panels. So that the panels of three, I believe, different panels of three to handle different cases. So during the 60s and 70s, when I was growing up, it was all labor governments in Israel, and they didn't have 61 seats, but they had 50 seats in the Knesset. So there were one or two other parties that they would form a coalition with, and always labor government. The big deal happened in the early 80s when Menachem Begin won. That's the first time a right-wing party ever won for plurality, for the to get the right to form a government in Israel, and there was right-wing parties ever since, except for a little blip with Yitzhak Rabin and a little one with Ehud Barak. But otherwise, it's been Menachem Begin, Ariel Sharon, Yitzhak Shamir, and Bibi Netanyahu as prime ministers of Israel since the 80s. Except, like I said, with Rabin for during the Oslo Accords, and until he was assassinated, and then Ehud Barak for a couple of years, and then he lost the election to Bibi Netanyahu. So the left-wing governments fell because of failed peace with the Palestinians. So had Yasser Arafat been true to his word, or had agreed to some concessions, very well could have been Ehud Barak all these years as prime minister of Israel, right? And nearly had an agreement. Ehud Barak, Yasser Arafat, and Clinton nearly had an agreement in the summer of 2000 at Camp David, and Arafat walked away. Could have had half of Jerusalem. Everything was ready to be signed, but he walked away from it and started the Intifada, and that was the end of Ehud Barak. So I'm oversimplifying, I know, but that's generally what it's about. So that's how the Israeli political system works. The issues are that in order to form a coalition government, most of the time they have included ultra-Orthodox religious parties in the government. And that's where the government of Israel impacts our relationship as American Jews with the Israeli government. Because of the fact that the ultra-Orthodox are in the government, of course, every political party has a platform on which they are running and for which they have been elected. And they feel an obligation to and a loyalty to that particular platform. And for the ultra-Orthodox, essentially the platform is Torah, but Torah in their interpretation of Torah. And so therefore, when they formed the coalition, when they agreed to be part of the coalition with these secular people who they would not normally associate with, but for the sake of getting money for their schools, they sit in this coalition government. That's issue number one for them, is that their population would be, and their schools would be supported by the Israeli government. So that Israeli taxpayer money is paying for, in some regard, some of the yeshivas and the teacher salaries for those yeshivas, and essentially for the yeshiva students to stay in yeshiva all the time. So that's why the ultra-Orthodox want to be there. Also, the ultra-Orthodox are in charge of the chief rabbinate. So Israel does not have a separation of church and state, or synagogue and state, because like European governments, all religions in Europe have an official representation in that particular country, and they get money from the government to support their religion. So there's the official Jewish body in France. I forget what it is because it's French words, and I don't remember that the abbreviation is. But that official entity represents the Jewish community, and they are the ones that receive the funds from the French government for all the Jewish organizations, including synagogues and rabbinic salaries in France. That's how it works. So the non-official synagogues in all these countries, which are conservative and reform synagogues, have to fight for, like we do, for membership and dues. And so the problem with being a conservative or reform Jew in Europe is that you already pay 50% of your salary to taxes. You don't have much discretionary income to go for dues for a synagogue. And why would you do that when going to synagogue, another synagogue, is free? So there's the United Hebrew Congregations of the British Commonwealth, and your taxpayer money in Britain pays for the chief rabbi's salary and the cemeteries and the synagogues in Britain, whereas the non-Orthodox ones in Britain have to fight for funds separately. The same in Israel. So Orthodox synagogues in Israel are built by the government. Land is apportioned to them. Buildings are built. Rabbis are paid by the Israeli government. To get married in Israel, you have to. There's no such thing as going to the county, the city hall. No such thing as going to city hall to get married in Israel. Doesn't exist. No matter what religion you are, you have to go to your religious authority, Christian, Druze, Muslim, Jewish, whatever. In Israel, Baha'i, you go to your religious authority, and they are the ones that take care of marrying you under the authority of the Israeli government, and you are registered, therefore, after you get married, in the Ministry of Interior as married. If you don't want to get married in your religion, then as a Jew, you can either go to Cyprus, and there are tour packages that you can fly to Cyprus, get married, come back to Israel, and Israel does recognize marriage licenses of other countries. As long as you are a citizen of Israel, and you get married outside of Israel legally, you come back, you show your marriage license, you are registered as married. So there are non-Orthodox Jews in Israel who are doing that, leaving the country, not just Cyprus, but other countries in Europe where it's cheap to do that. Sometimes even coming to America to do that. So because there are very few non-ultra-Orthodox rabbis who are authorized by the Israeli chief rabbinate to issue marriage licenses. There are some, but they're not very many. So then also to get divorced in Israel is the same thing. There's no such thing as a civil divorce in Israel. You have to go to your rabbinic authority in order to get divorced. So it's very hard, but Gesundheit. You would think, because we're American and we're used to freedom in this way and freedom of religion, that people in Israel would be up in arms. If Israel's a democracy, you would think that people should know better or would want to fight for religious pluralism. Israelis don't care. Israelis really don't care about this in the way that we care about it. So that the big issue for us, they do care about the Orthodox running things, but it's what impacts them more than getting married, because there's a way out of it. And also because most Jews in Israel say the synagogue I don't go to is Orthodox. Okay? So because they don't know about conservative. Israelis see conservative and reform as American imports. They don't see it as an authentic brand of Judaism. Even though conservative and reform have been in Israel since before 1948. Hebrew Union College was there before 1948. That's the college of the Reform movement. There are conservative synagogues that have been there since before 1948. All of them quite small. I attended one when I lived in Israel with my family in 1972 when I was in 5th grade. There was a small conservative synagogue in this coastal city of Ashkelon, which were mainly South African, Canadian, British, and American immigrants to Israel who are members of this synagogue, served by an American rabbi who was an immigrant to Israel, and is now served by an Argentinian immigrant to Israel. The conservative movement has grown in Israel. There's youth groups in Israel are a really big thing. So there is the Israeli equivalent of USY is there. It exists in Israel, but it's not the most popular one. There are charter schools. Like we have a charter school system, public school system here. There is an Israeli version of that, you wonder why the conservative movement has not done that, and they haven't. You would think that would be it's a no-brainer to form the conservative movement in Israel should form, and it's called the Masorti movement, they should form a political party. For some reason, they have always said, no, we don't want to sully ourselves in the political system, right? So you roll your eyes about that. When the ultra-Orthodox rabbis don't care about sullying themselves, who have even, like Aryeh Deri, in charge of the Shas party, has been in jail and out of jail and is still head of the Shas party. So yes, sullying, it's worth it to sully if you're going to get money for your political cause, for your religious cause. Right. So the Masorti movement hasn't done it. Then the Reform movement hasn't done it. Yes. So you would think that they should have, but they haven't. And otherwise, so they're still outsiders in the government. They're outsiders in the system, and they're outsiders in Israel. So, so here's the thing. The Netanyahu, who lived in Philadelphia for a couple years when his father was on sabbatical and had a position at University of Pennsylvania, an academic position. His older brother, Yonatan, and he attended Cheltenham High School, which was 5 minutes from my house. He's a few years older than me, so I never saw him there. But I went to the Jewish day school, Kibbutz Hebrew Academy, instead. But I took the bus from Cheltenham High School to a Kibbutz Hebrew Academy. Anyway, so Netanyahu knows about America. He speaks English very well, and is fluent in English, and he knows America, but he knows Israel more. And he says, so he plays to American Jews, and he's good friends with Sheldon Adelson and anybody else who has money to support him and causes in Israel. And so, yeah, he played along and said, oh, we'll make an egalitarian section for the Kotel. We'll make you happy. But we're going to stop work because the ultra-Orthodox don't like it. So there's a plan to make a nice big area. There is an area right now, but to make it bigger and easier to access, no, can't do that. But Park Avenue Synagogue, a huge conservative synagogue on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Park Avenue Synagogue has been around for 136 years. They decided last year, we're going to have a trip to Israel. They do trips to Israel all the time, like most synagogues do. But they were advertising a trip to Israel that for this past week, Christmas break, to sign up to celebrate the 136th anniversary of Park Avenue Synagogue and the 70th anniversary of Israel. So you'd think a few people would sign up. You know how many people signed up for this trip to Israel from Park Avenue Synagogue? Over 450. Have you ever heard of such a thing? Never. It is arguably the largest ever in the history of Israel, largest synagogue tour to Israel. 450 people. They had 5 different tracks. Huge trip to Israel. So they donated a Torah to the egalitarian Kotel. I saw pictures of it. They had a special Torah cover made and embroidered with a gift from Park Avenue Synagogue to the egalitarian Kotel, and met with Yitzhak Herzog, who is now the head of the Jewish Agency. Met with the tour group. They met whoever they wanted to meet with. They could meet with, but even with 450 people coming from Park Avenue Synagogue, you think Netanyahu or anybody in Israel is going to change anything to make Israel, religious society in Israel, more pluralistic? Absolutely not, because it's an American import. And so what Israelis care more about the Orthodox governing their lives is that stores and restaurants and entertainment establishments are closed on Shabbat. That's what Israelis care about, because Shabbat is their only day off. A lot of people in Israel now have Friday off, so they do have a 5-day work week, but Sunday is a work day. So Friday for a lot of people at least is a half a day, if not a whole day, and they have Shabbat. So if you can't do anything in Israel on Shabbat because places are closed, that's what people are having an outcry about. So there is a law that's saying maybe those mom and pop corner stores, we would call them 7-Elevens, but there's no chain. They are still, like, people remember in Washington that their parents owned a corner store, right? So they don't exist. What? Or whatever. Okay, but even before there was a chain of corner stores, everybody had their own corner store that was their own business, and they lived above the store. So in Israel, these corner stores still exist. There are some chains of corner stores, but there are others are just really mom and pop corner stores. They're called makolet. That's what the little market is called, as opposed to going to a supermarket. So a little convenience store. They thought that they would pass a bill to allow these makolets to be open. And that has been an outcry from the ultra-Orthodox. Can't let this happen, because the next thing you know, other things are going to be open. It's going to desecrate Shabbat. So that's the big deal for Israel. And that's what there's an Israeli advocacy group called Yisrael Chofshit, which means Israel should be free, which means it should be free of religious coercion. And their number one thing is this Shabbat law, not marriage. Marriage is marriage is on their agenda, but the number one thing is places being open on Shabbat. Miriam, and then Barbara. Yes. Right. Okay. So so Miriam is asking about if Netanyahu is indicted, or even if he's indicted after the election, who would run in his stead, and are they thinking is going to win the election? So I'm not an expert on this. All I would say is that the immediate past chief of staff of the Israeli army. So past chiefs of staffs of the Israeli armed forces have often gone into politics. So Moshe Dayan, Yitzhak Rabin, people like that, Ariel Sharon. Yes, lots of these people have been generals, if not chiefs of staff of the Israeli armed forces. And once they retire, they're a public persona. So people rally around them and say, oh, you know about security. And that's the number one issue in Israel is security, secure borders, especially from the Palestinians, but even the nations around them as well. So you want somebody who is strong and can that you can trust to arrive at a peace agreement with, as opposed to someone who's been a politician his or her whole life. So the immediate past head of the chief of staff is a guy named Gantz, and he has formed a party, and some are saying that or he's about to form a party, but I don't think he has a platform yet. So people don't know what he stands for. Once they know what he stands for, it's possible that he will give Netanyahu a run for his money. There are different coalitions that have been announced. So there was one guy, the head of labor, who just at a press conference, labor has an agreement with Tzipi Livni's party. And at a joint press conference, he tells her, I'm not working with you anymore. He didn't tell her that before the press conference. At the press conference, he embarrasses her and says, I'm not working with you anymore. I'm forming a coalition with somebody else. So it's gotten dirty already. And so it's unclear. Netanyahu might be able to survive this indictment. Most people, if they're indicted, resign. But I'm not sure it's illegal for someone to be indicted to be prime minister. I'm not sure. I mean, Ehud Olmert was indicted and he resigned. So I don't know. Yes. Oh, so that also, so Miriam is asking about the relationship, how the next prime minister would have a relationship with America. So that is a big deal for Israel because Israel usually is the number one benefactor of American tax dollars, mainly for the military. But some would say that we being Israel, doesn't need American money anymore. American money has gone to invest into research and development of ballistic systems, jets, fighter jets, other things like that, cybersecurity. So the Patriot missiles, this Iron Dome that Israel has that shoots down incoming rockets, it was heavily subsidized by American money, but it's Israeli technology that has really made it what it is. And so because American money is involved in lots of these things, Israel is restricted who they can sell their weapons to. Because it's partly American made. So any weapons that Israel wants to sell to India or to China has to get approved by America first. So some in Israel would say, we don't need American money. It's tying our hands. And the relationship, there's always going to be, not to take it for granted, but there's always going to be a good relationship between Israel and America, because Israel is essentially the only democracy in the Middle East. And for strategic reasons, America needs Israel as a front, against ISIS, Iran, Iraq, Syria, whatever. So Israel, some would say, should take that relationship for granted and doesn't have to do much to placate or be nice to America. So there wasn't a very good relationship between Netanyahu and Obama. And still, if you look at the numbers, Obama gave Israel the most money in the history of any president of the United States. So just look that up. I'm almost sure I'm right about that. So it doesn't really matter who the prime minister of Israel is going to be. Barbara. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Did that, they would lose their kashrut. Right. Yeah, so there's religious coercion that way too. So Barbara was bringing out about that any Israeli kosher hotel, all the hotels in Israel are automatically kosher. They have to be kosher, the restaurants and the hotel. So if they were to advertise or to have a New Year's Day or New Year's Eve party, which it's called Sylvester in Israel, for Saint Sylvester instead of New Year's Day. If they were to have that, they were threatened with having their kashrut rescinded. So that's an example of religious coercion. There was something the past week or so, like there was one of the malls in Israel had a Christmas tree in it, and somebody as a Santa Claus dressed up in it too. So, but that's a mall, not an eating establishment. So, yeah. So there is that religious coercion on every level. But again, what it comes down to is when people are asked how in Israel, how they define their Judaism, there's a number of ways they do that. So some would say, if they're asked if they're religious, for them, the word dati, which is religious in Hebrew, the immediate association with dati is someone with a black coat and a black hat. So if you're going to ask the average Israeli if they're dati, they're going to say no. So 80% of Israelis are not dati. But then ask, are you Masorti, which means traditional, not just the name of the conservative movement. Are you traditional? Most Israelis are traditional. What does that mean? They'll light candles on Friday night. Will they light it at exactly the right time to light it? Not necessarily, just like Jews here do. But will they gather for Shabbat dinner? Their families? Yes. Will it be kosher? Well, it's hard to be treif in Israel. But it's hard. It's not so hard to be not fully kosher. In other words, there could be many Israelis who don't have two sets of dishes. But despite that, they won't serve meat and milk at the same meal. But it's kind of hard to find non-kosher meat in Israel. Everywhere you go, you'd have to go into Arab neighborhoods to get non-kosher certified meat. And nobody really wants to do that. So if you're going to go into your local supermarket, you go into the meat case, it's all kosher. And it's all soaked and salted too. So, so it's hard not to be kosher. So most people in Israel are kosher. Even the restaurants that are not certified kosher in Israel, many of them are kosher. They just don't feel like paying the rabbinate for the kashrut. Now, there are some treif restaurants in Israel, like especially the port cities like Tel Aviv and Jaffa. You can get seafood there. I mean, like lobster, shrimp, that kind of stuff. But on a regular restaurant menu in Jerusalem, you won't find that. And so it's hard not to be kosher in Israel. And all these people who say that they're not Orthodox still consider themselves kind of traditional Jews. They know their children are going to marry somebody Jewish. It's kind of, again, because it's hard not to marry somebody Jewish. There are nearly 9 million people living in Israel now, and 75% of them are Jewish. 20% of them are Arab, and then there's 5% other. So it's kind of hard not to marry somebody Jewish in Israel. So for them, so they'll do Shabbat dinner, and then they'll go out to a club or something like that, or they'll go to the soccer game that's on Shabbat afternoon. They might go to synagogue in the morning, mostly not, but if they do, they'll go to the soccer game in the afternoon. So, but the conservative synagogue is not on the list. So for them, society is still more traditional conservative with a small c. So that's well. First, it's Judy is saying you don't need conservative or reform Judaism. It's not a matter of need. It's a matter of it's just not really viable for them. So just people have heard about it. So I was in Israel last summer. I led a trip to Israel this past summer, as you know. So we all arrived in Israel separately. We're supposed to meet at the hotel in Tel Aviv by dinner that particular night. So I got there in the afternoon, and so I get into a cab. And so I speak Hebrew, and I can understand Hebrew better. And the cabbie's asking, where am I from? So I tell him where I'm from. What do you do? So, okay, I hate that question. What do you do? Right? So I had to explain to an Israeli that I'm a conservative rabbi. So he said, oh, I know a conservative. My brother has family in Argentina, and we went to a conservative synagogue in Argentina to celebrate my son's bar mitzvah. Oh, his son's or his nephew's bar mitzvah. Oh, so do you go to a conservative synagogue here? No. I would never go to synagogue. So he said, but you know what your problem is? He's telling me what the conservative movement should do to get recognized in Israel. A cab driver taking me to the hotel in Tel Aviv, telling me that you should have demonstrations at the Knesset all the time. So like Judy said, should have a political party, or he should have demonstrations all the time. Why the conservative movement hasn't done that, I don't know. Women of the Wall, an independent organization made up of secular, conservative, Orthodox, conservative women who want access to the wall. They've been together for 12 years, and only in the past 2 have they had publicity about what's been going on with them. So again, for those who take the high road, it gets you nowhere. In other words, those saying we don't want to be sullied by politics. But if you take the low road and get involved in politics, then do you gain the respect in Israel? I don't know. Do you get anything done in Israel? I don't know. How many seats would the Masorti movement get in a Knesset? Would it be enough to even say, they are a group that needs to be reckoned with? We want to form a coalition government with them? I don't know, but I think they should try. And there are enough people who sound Israeli who are part of the conservative. It would be the worst thing if I ran for the political party in Israel, because I'd be speaking Hebrew with an American accent. Who wants that? Now, Golda Meir spoke Hebrew with an American accent, but she signed the Declaration of Independence in Israel, so they let her in. So, what was that? What's the foreign minister or defense? Moshe Aarons. He spoke with an American accent too, and another American. Well, okay, so they'll let people like that slide. And Abba Eban, right, who spoke with an English accent, right? But again, these are people who formed the state of Israel, so they get a pass. But if I'd be like the poster child for this is why we do not want to vote for conservative movement in Israel, because it's people like laymen who are just American imports. And who wants an American import in Israel? Yes, right. Right, exactly. Right. 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 And even here in America, you don't need a connection with a synagogue anymore. Even in America, not so much because you could do it. Yeah. Right. But in Israel, you don't. Right. You just leave it. If you live in Israel, you're Jewish. Stuff is closed. Everybody, right. Everything is Jewish. So you don't need it. And so exactly the synagogue that you don't need is free in your neighborhood, except the conservative synagogue, which is not free. So why would an Israeli want to pay dues to a synagogue they're not going to go to when they can go to a synagogue they're not going to go to for free? Right? So that's the problem that conservative movement and the reform movement has in Israel. So these synagogues many of them are maintained by people like us who give donations to synagogues in Israel to have. A friend of mine just sent me an email 2 weeks ago. Jonah, we've seen you daven at our synagogue in Jerusalem. It's great to see you. Would you like to support us? And I didn't answer right away. And she sends me another email last week. Oh, Jonah, I don't know if you saw the email. It's holidays, whatever. And that's just remember what you gave 2 years ago. Could you do it again? So, right. So this is what the synagogue needs. And I go to that synagogue because my friends are there. And these are all the people in the synagogue. No, I'd say 2/3 of the people in attendance at the service are Americans who have made Aliyah or, like me, visiting for a Shabbat. So that's the problem. Every now and then they'll get an Israeli family that said, you know what, my girl, she's not going to be able to do anything else in the Orthodox synagogue. We've heard about you. We'd like to have her have a bat mitzvah. So that no Hebrew school required because they know Hebrew already. So a little bit of training to read Torah and a Haftarah, not much to do, just learn how to sing because they know Hebrew already. So some of the synagogues have families like that, but who are not members beyond the bar mitzvah or the bat mitzvah. So it's a major uphill battle that the conservative movement. So that's why we should care about Israeli elections, and that is to be thinking about the pluralism issue in Israel and help the Yisrael Chofshit, Israel Be Free. If you look that up, israelbefree.org.il, I think. Whatever, Google it, you'll see, and you can look into supporting that to maybe help make a change. Julian, the last question, that'll be it for the night.
So, long as it's taken the form of government in the past.
Oh, so the longest it's taken to form a government in Israel. So I think the last time Tzipi Livni, from what I remember, the elections in 2013, it's possible that Tzipi Livni and the parties that formed with her to run in the election actually won more seats than Netanyahu. But it was clear that there was nobody that Tzipi Livni could make a coalition with on the left that would outnumber the coalition, even though Netanyahu's party got less seats than Tzipi Livni, the coalition that he could come up with would have a lot more seats than Tzipi Livni. So that took a while to figure out, and I think it took two weeks actually for the government to form.
Fractures. It could be inability to.
No, there isn't, because there are enough. All these people want to have power. So these little parties see that they have power. That means they'll be in charge of some government ministry. And there are more government ministries now than ever in the history of Israel that are just created in order to give a cabinet post to one of these political parties. So yeah, there's no way somebody's going to say, no, I don't agree with you totally ideologically, Bibi. No, they're going to say, oh, please let me be part of your government so I can have money and for my people and for my schools or things like that. People do that. Yes, that's how it works. So Tzipi Livni's she could have included Arab political parties, but there's no way. people really, the labor or the especially the far right parties are not going to form a coalition with the Arab lists, and there's a communist list. So these are just people on the left that Tzipi Livni was just not going to form a government with, and then there was nobody else. So even though she had more, she had nobody to form the coalition with. So that's what it comes down to, and then that's what the president of Israel has to determine who to invite to the president's house to say.
This came out very quick.
Yes, it did. I wasn't sure I had enough to talk about. So, yes. All right. So, have a good night, everybody. And the first Wednesday in February, we'll see what's up. What's up then? What we'll talk about. Have a good night.